only King forever. Almighty God, we lift you higher. You are the only King forever, forevermore. You are victorious. Yes, you are. Amen. You can have a seat.
Well, let me echo Happy Canada Day, and I've seen some people wearing red and maple leaves, and isn't it wonderful to celebrate together? I love being Canadian. I've had the opportunity to travel, and we even lived in a different country for a while, but I would choose Canada every time. And I confess that when I'm outside of Canada, I feel a lot of pride about being able to call myself Canadian. I was thinking about we're known for our politeness and our tolerance, for initiating the peacekeeping troops, for our courageous soldiers in the wars, for free healthcare, our beautiful nature, our quality education, democracy, and hockey, to name a few. But we're also known for our humility, so I have to keep the list brief, or that would become a bit too prideful and very un-Canadian. But I am thankful to live here. The Canadian access to free Medicare and the Canadian discovery of insulin are especially significant to our family, as our son's life relies on it. I get emotional seeing Canadian flags. Lisa and I were at a mother-daughter camp last week, and they do a flag-raising ceremony. I've been known to embarrass my family by outright crying at the national anthem when there's crowds of people singing it. And so really, Canada is a great country. It's the best. And yet, here we are gathered as Canadians, and we know that it's not perfect. We know that there's still injustice and pain. And as much as I love being part of this country, there is a place that is more my home than Canada. A place that I have not yet seen, and yet a place that I belong and where I will live someday forever. I love this line from C.S. Lewis's book, The Last Battle. One of the characters speaks of the destination at the end of his journey, and this is what he calls out to the other travelers. I have come home at last. This is my real country. I belong here. This is the land I have been looking for all my life, though I never knew it till now. Come further up, come further in. And that's how we're going to feel about heaven. We who are Jesus followers belong somewhere else. In Ephesians, it's put this way: you are fellow citizens with the saints and the members of the household of God, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone. Jesus is the cornerstone of our heavenly citizenship. And as we celebrate and enjoy being Canadians this weekend, maybe with a little bit of pride, I trust that it will also remind us that our true citizenship is elsewhere. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, thank you for choosing us to be part of your household. Thank you that our citizenship is with you. Canada is where we live, and we're thankful that we have the freedoms and the privileges here. But I pray that we don't forget that this is temporary. We're already part of your family, even while living here. We look forward to the day when we will be with you in a country where we long to be, with no pain and no injustice. Thank you this day for our church family. I pray that we will be an encouragement and support to each other. Amen. So a few announcements as we begin. Let me juggle my papers. Okay. You've seen a few things on the screen, so there's no alternative today. Happy Canada Day. We're all staying in for this morning. Are Clint and Hannah not here? Really? Oh, they got married yesterday, so we celebrate that with them. And so when you see them again, it will be Mr. and Mrs. You can make a note to congratulate them. Our church's social media and website are expanding into Twitter. If you're a Twitter follower, then I don't want to talk too much because I'll get into language that just makes me look ignorant. Twitter, tweet, whatever. So the social media is expanding. Great. I love it that we can communicate with more people. Isn't that wonderful? And our summer camp's coming up. So this week we have our first one, which is the art camp. It's sold out, and so you can be in prayer. It starts on Tuesday because we're taking the Monday holiday, and we've got 4 days with 22 kids signed up to come, and just you can be in prayer, lots of them from the community. There's still spots in the rest of the camps through the summer, so if you do run into neighbors, you can let them know that there are spots available in the other camps. But just this week, we are full already, which is great news. And if there's youth that you know that would like to be involved, the camp in August, we do a youth training day beforehand, and then we have lots of youth involved in the third week of August. So love to hear if there's anyone who wants to be involved in that too.
Thank you, Sherry. We have to stand for this one because it is our national anthem. What I like about our national anthem, and some of these words might be from the older version of the national anthem, but what I love about it is that there is a prayer that our forefathers put into this, and that our foundation on being built was on a foundation of understanding who God was and our response to him. So as we sing this, might it be a part of this prayer that God will keep our land glorious and free.
We
This song is one that I've grown to love. We repeat the chorus. I know not everybody likes repeating choruses over and over again, but it says, it's your breath in our lungs. And this is the reason why we pour out our praise. It's your life in mine. This is the reason why I live the way I do. And the bridge goes like this. May all the earth shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, even these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord.
You are love, you bring life
Good morning, my fellow neighborhood. You should know this by now, folks. Come on. That really disappointed me right there. What's that? No, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. I don't change. Okay, I change. God never changes. So over the summer weeks, we thought we'd look. I thought, okay, we meaning the royal we, me. Thought it'd be a good idea if we considered how we could enter more fully into the unhurried. See how I'm doing that there? Unhurried, restful, peaceful life of God. I, like many of you, find myself at times too busy, sometimes overscheduled. I don't know about you, but for me, when I have too much on and my to-do list is looking more like a to-do book, I get this feeling of overwhelmed, and I tend to freeze like a deer in headlights. I look at my list and I go, where do I start? And when I'm doing one thing, I'm thinking about the other thing I should be doing, so then I go to do that, and then I remember this other thing I should be doing, and I never get nothing done. That's not you, is it? And this is when I realized that the busyness and the hurry in my life has not simply been growing my to-do list, it's been growing inside of me, in my heart. You see, last week we explored how hurry is, first of all, a condition of the heart. It's what makes our minds race even though our bodies are tired. When you hit the sack because you're exhausted physically, but your mind keeps spinning with all the things you have to do. It's not simply that we are in a hurry, but that hurry is in us. And this is not the type of abundant life that Jesus came to give. He did not come to say, and I will give you abundant life so full and so busy and so hectic that you'll always be busy. This is not the way of rest that Jesus offered when he said, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. So how do we enter into this life of God so that his life consumes our anxious, busy, hurried hearts and allows us to rest, even though, like Jesus, we remain productive and active? An unhurried life is not a non-productive life. It's a state of the heart. At the end of last week's message, I talked about how the ancients developed what was called a rule of life. And the word rule is the same word for trellis. And a trellis is a support system that allows a plant to flourish and bear fruit. A trellis has rungs over which the vines grow, and it's as if they are like steps in a stepladder that the plant takes hold of and wraps itself around in order that it won't fall. And there's certain things in our life that can act like steps in a stepladder that we can wrap our life around so that when things are getting busier, it keeps us from falling. In developing a rule of life that helps to provide a framework for the fruit of God to grow in our lives, and there are certain habits and disciplines that serve as these rungs. And this framework aids our soul, our inner life, from becoming overwhelmed and provides a structure for our inner life to see the fruit of change. Is this making sense to you? You understand what I'm saying? So there's certain habits and disciplines that we can instill so that when things get busier, we can hold on to these things to keep life from getting overwhelming. And these practices then put together create a rule or a trellis over which our life is developed more fully into the life that God wants for us. So what I'd like to do is look at one particular habit that wise followers of Jesus embed into their life. And I'd like to come to it by way of an Old Testament story. It's found in Exodus chapter 17, verses 1 to 7. And the story takes place during the desert wandering of the Israelites after the Exodus from Egypt. And this story actually has become, it looks like a minor story the first time you read it, but actually it's referred to all over the place in the Bible. It became one of the major stories within the Old Testament that impacted the life of the community. So the whole Israelite community set out from the desert of sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses replied, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me." The Lord answered Moses, "Go out in front of the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." So Moses did this in the sight of the elders and Israel, and he called that place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled and because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" There's several things that we need to draw out from this story. First, I just want to point out this is an enacted parable. It was telling a deeper story, even though the Israelites were not aware of it. I doubt even Moses was aware of it. In the book of 1 Corinthians, it says, "For they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ." In a desert, water represents life. And in essence, the parable being enacted was telling how when Jesus was struck, he provided life for everyone who was thirsty. That's why when Moses performs the same miracle the second time, he was told not to strike the rock, but simply command it. When he struck the rock a second time, he was actually crucifying Christ all over again. And as you know, that is not a good thing. And that's why he was forbidden from entering the promised land. There is a second thing you need to understand from the story. Moses calls the place Massah and Meribah. The word Massah means testing, and the word Meribah means quarreling. The testing and quarreling was not with Moses. Moses was simply God's representative. Israel was testing and quarreling with God. Now, when we read this story, it's very easy, I think, to take on an air of superiority. We would never test or quarrel with God, would we? But there's another aspect to this story. In Psalm 95, and I got to string a few passages together, so work with me on this because it builds in momentum. In Psalm 95, the psalmist looks back at this same event, and it becomes known as simply as the rebellion. He's looking at the rebellion. This was the rebellion. And he writes this: "Today, if you would hear his voice, do not harden your heart as you did at Meribah, as you did the day at Massah in the wilderness, where your ancestors tested me. They tried me, though they had seen what I did. For 40 years I was angry with that generation. I said, they are a people whose hearts go astray, and they have not known my ways. So I declared an oath in my anger, they shall never enter my rest." The psalmist is saying this. He's saying a hardened heart, because the people's hearts were hard, the people then tested God and they quarreled with God. And the end result was that God would not allow them to enter into his rest. The book of Hebrews now picks up on this psalm, which is commenting on Genesis. And we read this commentary about the Exodus event. "There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God, for anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one will perish by following their example of disobedience." There is a Sabbath rest for the people of God. This passage certainly speaks about the final rest that comes once our life on earth is done. One day we will all be at rest. And that's why we put rest in peace when we enter that rest. The rest that we enter knowing that God has saved us from the consequences of our sin, and there's nothing we can do to earn that. However, this can lead us to think that life then remains one great big push of effort to do the will of God, running the race with unceasing effort until finally, at the end, we collapse over the finish line where we can finally rest, having spent our life striving and burning out. I don't think that's what God intended. In fact, I'm sure of it. Sabbath is not a specific day, it's a type of day. And it's a type of day which is characterized by rest. When God created Adam and Eve on the 6th day, their first task on the 7th day was rest. Even in the Jewish understanding of time, it speaks about this. The Hebrew day starts at sundown. The day starts with sleep, with rest. And we think, though, that days end in rest. We see rest as the reward of having worked hard all day. But the Hebrews understood rest as a gift at the beginning of the day from which they were then able to work. Rest was a priority. In the West, we have made work the priority. We have this work now, rest later mentality. We even do this on our holidays. We'll just push through until August when I can get 2 weeks at the cottage where I'll go up and rest as I'm renovating. And we may think that all this sounds the same. You say tomato, I say tomato, but there is a world of difference. What has happened in our society is that we drive ourselves to near exhaustion, and then we collapse into some mind-numbing escape at the end of the day until the next day when we can start all over again. We're driven by our anxieties over the things we have to do. Work is demanded and rest is earned. But in the biblical model of Sabbath, rest is not earned. It's a gift that we receive. And from it, we are enabled to work and do the work that lies ahead. And this cycle of Sabbath rest is 1 day in 7. It is 1 day that we are given that God says you may rest. Woven into the very fabric of our being is this need for regular rest and recovery. In studies done at the University of Arizona, it showed that there was a biological need for rest every 7th day. Failure to rest after 6 days of steady work will lead to insomnia, sleepiness, hormonal imbalances, fatigue, irritability, organ stress, and other increasingly serious physical and mental symptoms. In other words, you need to rest 1 day in 7. But notice that the passage in Hebrews says, make every effort to enter this rest. You see, the twin sins of Israel of testing and quarreling are still present to test us also. There are forces at work to try to pull you away from rest. Thomas Merton says that the most pervasive form of violence in the modern world is busyness. Not drugs, not guns, but busyness. The Chinese character for busy combines the pictographs for heart and death, suggesting that busyness kills the heart. The Israelites did not enter the rest because they chose to test God instead of trust God. We can do the same thing. I mean, what's the harm if I put in a few extra hours on Sunday to catch up anyways, right? I mean, what's the harm if I just get ahead on a few chores? I still feel fine. It's not really a problem. And in such ways, we test God. Because the reality is that after a couple of hours of resting, we get restless. I mean, I can do it for a couple hours, then I just got to start getting productive. Because my mind's been thinking about it the whole time. I can't sit here any longer. I got to get busy. And I wonder if that's the point. I wonder if that restlessness is like a toxin that needs to be drained out. And if we're going to stay at rest, we really have to make an effort. We have to resist that false narrative that tries to persuade us that working really will be okay. It doesn't matter what God says. I know, it'll be okay. It's okay, God. And what we find is that we're soon quarreling with God as we struggle and strive with Him instead of resting and trusting. And you may be tempted to think it's not that big a deal. And I'd like to suggest that it is a big deal. It's a dangerous deal. It's a destructive, life-denying, soul-depleting deal when we fail to rest. You see, taking Sabbath is an act of trust. It's an act of saying you trust in God. It's showing your faith in God, that He's able to control the world without your help. Conversely, when we do not take Sabbath, we're saying of God, I don't trust you. Not working is an act of trust that says, I believe that God will provide for all my needs, even though I take this day to rest. Michael Zigarelli, associate professor of management at Charleston University School of Business, conducted a survey in which 20,000 Christians around the world revealed the number one reason for not actively pursuing a vibrant, robust, healthy relationship with God. The number one reason? Busyness and overload. I don't have time to pursue God. He described what he felt was a vicious cycle that prompted by Christians conforming to cultural norms, and it went like this. So we begin by assimilating the culture of busyness and hurry. We just do what the world's doing. And we take on this culture of busyness and hurry and overload that leads to us becoming more marginalized in Christian lives. Like, I don't have time for that. I didn't have time to be still, which leads to a deterioration of our relationship with God, which leads us then to becoming more vulnerable to adopting the secular assumptions about how we live, becoming more like the world, and conforming to it in more busy and more hurry. Somewhere we have to break the cycle. Wayne Muller has reasoned in this way: because we do not rest, we lose our way, poisoned by the hypnotic belief that good things come only through unceasing determination and tireless effort. We can never truly rest. And for want of rest, our lives are in danger. Friends, is it possible that this is true of you? Are some of you in danger? But let me say this. I am not advising you to simply drop everything you've planned as if God commands that I not work, and therefore I'm going to drop all my previously arranged commitments and responsibilities. Making every effort to enter his rest will mean that going forward, you will not make commitments that will require you to work on that one day you set aside. Not because you have to, not because God's going to get angry because you broke his command, but because he has given you the Sabbath as a gift. You get to rest without fear of missing out on all the blessings that God desires for you. You don't have to justify it to other people. God says you may rest. One day in 7, we orient our hearts towards heaven. In a sense, we are enacting what heaven will be like. We experience a foretaste of rest. When we die, we are told that God will say to us, "Enter into my rest." Rest is a kind of foretaste of heaven. Friends, do you ever think about this? One day, we'll be together with perfect bodies, unblemished characters, sinless demeanors, and radiant love, and we'll recognize each other. As surely as we're here now, there will come a day when those who have placed their lives into the hands of Jesus to lead will be present before the visible presence of the one we love, and our hearts will be at rest, and we will not be anxious to get to the next appointment. We won't be pacing to find out what happens next. We won't be nervously looking at the clock to see if it's almost time for something else. No, friends, we will be absolutely content, full of joy and satisfaction, bloated with happiness, such that we feel like we're going to pop. And should we be asked, we would say we could stay in that place and in that state forever. And we will. It's unfathomable. That does not mean we will not be active. It does not mean that we won't have things to do. It just means the inner state of our lives will be at rest in ways we could never imagine. Friends, a rest is coming, a complete and perfect rest. And recognizing that and orienting our hearts around that reality one day in 7 helps us to keep perspective in the work and activity we now face. It just makes us realize it's not that big a deal. We think as if we have to live for our work. It's not the case. You were designed to experience rhythms, seasons, and change. Each day we spend some time awake and some time asleep. Within every inhaling of breath, we must exhale. There are times when we revel in the company of friends, we enjoy a good party, we like to experience the thrill of a large event, but too much of that, and we find ourselves craving just to be alone, to be still and undisturbed on a cold day in front of a fireplace, on a hot day stretched out on a hammock or a lawn chair. Isn't it part of the pleasure of living where we do that we get to experience the joy of the change of seasons, the warmth of summer, the colors of fall, the glitter of bright, glistening, undisturbed snowfalls in winter, the bursting of life and fresh smells in spring. And change helps us feel alive. They keep us from sinking into ruts of despair. God has designed us for sacred rhythms in our life, and Sabbath is one of those sacred rhythms. 6 days we work. And then comes Saturday night. The Sabbath begins. It starts, and we can rest. And we can rest all day. And then comes Sunday evening, the next day begins according to the Jewish understanding of time. You could plan out the whole week Sunday night and rest in preparation for it. If you're like me, the reason we resist Sabbath is not because we don't like resting. It's because resting can be such hard work. Right? Have you ever gripped onto something for so long, for so hard, that when you finally try to open your hand, it's painful to open your hand? That is what it's like for Sabbath for many of us. We strive all week to hold it together, and then on Sabbath we finally get to let go, and we just find it so hard to let go. But we fail to do so at our peril. Failing to embrace the rhythm of Sabbath rest in our weekly routine will bankrupt your life from all kinds of pleasures that God longs for you to know. Friends, when we let go of our life and take hold of God's, when we surrender all of our life to Him, one of the ways that Satan will keep us from entering into the life of God is through busyness. Do you remember the parable of the sower that Jesus told? He says that some of the seed fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly, but because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched and they withered because they had no root. You see, growing quick doesn't give you deep roots. Other seed among the thorns fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plant. And the seed perished were some of the first that sprung up, but their roots were not deep, and the others were choked by weeds, which Jesus called the care of this world, getting more done, obtaining more, and Jesus said it made them unfruitful. Friends, as we adopt the rule of life, one of the first disciplines we need to establish and practice if we long to bear fruit and thrive and grow deep roots and experience the life of God is the practice of a Sabbath day. One day a week in which we cease from our work, exercise our faith in God, and allow ourselves to receive the gift of rest that God has given to us.
Will you stand with us as we sing and pray with one another?
For
application for today's sermon. It just kind of came to me. This afternoon, rest. I know, it just kind of came to me. I just thought, what a great day to practice the sermon. You get the right to rest. It's a gift. You can receive it. Now, I know, you can't possibly rest, get too much on. Really? Really? Too much? Maybe you're right. Maybe you have too much on. So maybe today you have to do things, but you don't have to do things next Sabbath. Here's the promise of God. Strive to enter his rest. Make a way to be obedient to the rest he gives as a gift. This week, friends, enter into his rest because it's restoring to your soul. It's life-giving. And you will find through it, you will bear all kinds of fruit that you can't receive through striving. Go in the grace and peace of God.
Great is thy